Right now, somewhere, a city is hanging banners, painting crosswalks, and bracing for a few 100,000 strangers to show up all at once. The World Cup final is days away. Cameras everywhere. Flags everywhere. Every host city looks like it just won the lottery. But the real economics behind hosting the World Cup are far more interesting than you think, and far less kind than the fireworks suggest. Here's the first surprise. You don't actually get to keep the money. FIFA runs the World Cup like a franchise, and you are not the franchise owner. You're closer to the venue it's borrowing for a month. Ticket sales, broadcast rights, sponsorships, licensing, hospitality packages, all of it flows to FIFA, centrally, globally. You, the host city, don't see a cut of game day ticket revenue. You don't see a cut of concessions. You don't even automatically get to sell your own local sponsorships, because FIFA's commercial exclusivity rules lock up entire categories for its own partners. One host committee found out the hard way that it couldn't sign a convenience store chain as a local sponsor, because FIFA had already promised that entire category to McDonald's. So how do you actually get chosen to host in the first place? It starts years in advance, with a formal bid. Cities or countries submit detailed proposals covering stadium capacity, transportation infrastructure, hotel inventory, and government guarantees. And that last part is where things get heavy. FIFA requires host governments to sign onto a long list of commitments before a single ball is kicked. Tax exemptions, streamlined visa processes, guaranteed security funding, legal protections that shield FIFA from local liabilities. These aren't polite requests. They're conditions of entry, and cities agree to them years before they know what the final bill will look like, because the alternative is losing the tournament to a rival bid. Now let's talk about what you're actually on the hook for once you win. Security, transportation upgrades, stadium retrofitting to meet FIFA's exact specifications, sometimes including full grass field conversions inside stadiums built for a completely different sport. Fan festivals, which typically run for the entire month of the tournament. Public safety staffing at a scale most cities never plan for outside of a natural disaster. Estimates for the most recent tournament put each host city's infrastructure, transportation, and security investment somewhere between $100 million and $200 million. And FIFA doesn't cover most of it. The contracts are explicit. Host cities are responsible for security, transportation, and public safety costs. FIFA pays for the stadium rental itself and the broadcast operations, and not a great deal more. Here's where the story gets genuinely uncomfortable. Because of the exclusivity rules baked into the hosting agreement, the traditional way cities pay for mega events, selling their own local sponsorships, and keeping a slice of ticket revenue, is mostly closed off. So the money has to come from somewhere else. Usually, that somewhere else is the taxpayer. One recent analysis estimated a collective shortfall of up to $250 million across just the American host cities, even after factoring in federal security funding. Some cities discovered they'd have to backstop the bill directly out of municipal budgets, with no clear answer for what happens if the funding gap doesn't close in time. And it isn't only the big-ticket items. Even the small logistics turn expensive fast. One host city found that running its fan festival, essentially a large public viewing party with programming, cost close to $1 million a day. Faced with that number, they simply shortened the festival to less than half the length of the tournament. Transit pricing became its own controversy in another market, where the round-trip train fare to the stadium was initially set more than 10 times higher than the normal commuter price, before public backlash forced a reversal. So why does any city say yes to this? Because the alternative math is genuinely tempting on paper. FIFA and independent analysts have projected the tournament could add tens of billions of dollars to the broader economy and support hundreds of thousands of jobs globally. Hotels raise their rates. Restaurants see a surge in foot traffic. Local businesses near the stadium and fan zones can post their best month of the year. There's also something harder to put a number on, what economists sometimes call psychic income. The pride, the global spotlight, the sense that your city matters on a stage normally reserved for a handful of capitals. For a mayor or a tourism board, that's genuinely valuable, even if it never shows up cleanly on a balance sheet. But independent economists who've studied decades of these tournaments are consistently skeptical that the promised windfall reaches the host city itself. The pattern repeats across nearly every recent mega event. Impact studies tend to count total visitor spending without subtracting the spending that would have happened anyway, or the local residents who skip the area entirely to avoid the congestion and higher prices. Hotels can raise rates without actually filling more rooms. International arrival numbers. The fans FIFA is really counting on to spend the big money don't always show up in the volume that was projected. And once the tournament ends, most of the new spending ends with it. There's rarely a lasting shift in the local economy once the flags come down. Here's the counterintuitive truth most people never expect. Hosting the World Cup isn't really a business deal, even though it's dressed up like one. It functions more like a very expensive marketing campaign that a city pays for out of its own pocket on behalf of an organization that keeps the profits. The tournament genuinely does generate enormous economic activity. It's just that the entity capturing most of that value isn't the host city itself. It's FIFA. And that gap between who takes the risk and who takes the revenue is the actual economic story here, far more than any single ticket price or hotel rate. Who's actually involved in a deal like this? FIFA sits at the center, negotiating directly with national governments and drafting the host city contracts that spell out every obligation. Local organizing committees, often nonprofit entities set up specifically for the tournament, handle fundraising and day-to-day coordination on the ground. Stadium owners, sometimes NFL or MLS franchises whose venues are being borrowed, negotiate their own separate rental terms. Federal, state, and local governments provide security funding and infrastructure support, frequently through tax exemptions or dedicated grant programs. And official sponsors, the handful of global brands that pay enormous sums for exclusive category rights, fund a meaningful share of FIFA's own revenue in exchange for locking out every local competitor in their space for the duration of the tournament. It helps to compare this tournament to the ones before it. Older World Cups often required entire stadiums built from scratch, at costs running into the billions of dollars for a single country, only for several of those stadiums to sit mostly empty once the tournament left town. Economists have a name for that outcome: white elephants. Massive, expensive structures with no real future use. The most recent tournament largely avoided that specific trap by reusing existing NFL and Major League Soccer stadiums across multiple countries instead of building new ones. That genuinely lowered the single biggest historical risk, but it didn't eliminate the underlying cost structure. It just shifted the biggest expenses from concrete and steel to security, transportation, and retrofitting, which turned out to be substantial in their own right. The sponsorship layer deserves its own explanation, because it's easy to misunderstand from the outside. A handful of global companies pay enormous sums, often hundreds of millions of dollars, for the right to be the exclusive brand in their category anywhere near the tournament. In exchange, FIFA enforces what's sometimes called a clean site policy, stripping out any unauthorized branding in and around official venues. That protects the sponsor's investment completely. But it also means a host city, even one desperate for extra revenue, is contractually barred from selling that same advertising space to a local business, a regional bank, or its own tourism board. The exclusivity that makes the sponsorship valuable to the global brand is the same exclusivity that closes off a natural revenue source for the host. Not every city says yes, and that's worth paying attention to. At least one major American city walked away from the bidding process entirely after concluding FIFA couldn't offer the financial protections it needed. Another city ran into a purely logistical deal breaker, discovering its stadium's retractable field simply couldn't fit a regulation pitch, and pivoted instead to hosting public watch parties without ever bidding for an actual match. Both are quiet reminders that saying no to hosting is itself a legitimate economic decision, not a failure of ambition. If you were a city official seriously evaluating whether to bid for something like this, here's the practical starting point. Before signing anything, get an independent economic analysis of the actual host contract terms, not the promotional projections handed out by the tournament organizer. Model the worst-case security and infrastructure cost against your most conservative visitor forecast, not the optimistic one, because the contractual obligations are fixed regardless of how many international fans actually show up. The gap between those two numbers is the real risk you're signing up for. Talk to the people who actually run these host committees, and a different picture emerges too, one that isn't purely bleak. Some organizers insist their fundraising, built from corporate donations, stadium rental payments FIFA does make, and state-level tourism grants, will cover the bill entirely, with any surplus redirected to local charitable programs. Whether that optimism holds up depends heavily on ticket demand, hotel occupancy, and how disciplined the spending stays right up until the final whistle. It's a reminder that hosting isn't automatically a loss. It's a bet, with real variance, made under contract terms written almost entirely by someone else. There's also a quieter way to benefit from a tournament like this without ever hosting a single match. Cities near host venues, or cities that simply lean into the cultural moment with public watch parties and hospitality packages, can capture a meaningful slice of the tourism and media attention without taking on the massive fixed costs of an official host city contract. Sometimes the smartest position isn't holding the trophy ceremony. It's setting up just outside the spotlight, where the upside still reaches you, but the bill doesn't. So the next time you watch a packed stadium erupt on television, notice what the broadcast doesn't show you. Notice the security budget nobody debates on camera. Notice the contract clause that quietly redirected a city's own advertising dollars to a Fortune 500 sponsor. What looks like a month-long celebration for the host city is actually a carefully structured transfer of risk and cost, dressed up in flags and fireworks, with the biggest financial winner sitting comfortably outside the stadium walls the entire time. Right now, somewhere, that city is hanging banners, painting crosswalks, and hoping the math works out better than the last one did. Now you know what's actually behind the banners.